Now let's look at those service checks that we talked about. So service checks can actually be set up for really a large number of different things. And depending on the type of system that you're monitoring, service checks are basically any kind of application level check. And you can see here they're broken out: active service checks versus passive service checks. Passive service checks for these, for example, are for services running on the system. Since we're already monitoring those services in the process of collecting data, they're set up as passive checks. And if that data collection ever fails for them, the passive check will go critical and generate an alarm just like it would for an active check, but it's much lower overhead this way. If I want to create a new active service check, I can go in here and click Add Command. And then basically I would pick that from a menu of different service checks. And in OmniCenter 9, you're going to see there's a library built into the system. We also have a bigger centralized library that has hundreds of other checks in it. So if you don't see what you're looking for here, do contact support, because they may have that service check just ready to plug in on your system. In OmniCenter 10, there'll actually be a cloud library search button you'll be able to click that'll automatically perform those functions. But if you're looking for a particular type of service check, do feel free to reach out to support and ask them if there's a service check if you're not seeing the one that you want. So I can go in here, for example, and say, look at a particular module alarm, or look for a network application, like check to see if DNS is working on this system, or if it's responding to MS SQL queries. There's a whole lot of different types of monitors that you can do. There's also connectivity type checks, where it can be anything from just a local, like TCP port check, for example, to something more complicated like logging into an application. Whichever service check you pick, you're going to get prompted for a couple of different parameters, and they're going to vary based on the service check you've selected. They should be pretty self-explanatory. In this case, I'm going to look for a TCP port being open, and I'm going to add MS networking as the name of this service check. The description is important because the description has to be unique per device. So every device can only have one service check of any given description on it. And the service check is also, the description is also the name that goes out when this service check has a problem. So make sure that it's descriptive enough that you can recognize what it is you're monitoring with it. Under the configuration options, you've got alarm hours. Again, these are the same time frames that we set up before. And if you need to customize those, by the way, it's under administration, under alerts, and then under time frames. These are basically time of day and day of week restrictions that you can apply. And if this particular service goes critical outside of the alarm hours, it will show up as critical in the web interface, but it will not generate an alarm or an incident. So it won't create notifications or take actions. You can see here also that you can set those alert timers. So you can pick, from the defaults, or you can go in and set custom timers like we talked about to set specific intervals for how often to check the service and how often to re-notify it. One thing to keep in mind is that the total failures counter, if you set that to 1, OmniCenter will do no rechecking. As soon as this service fails, it will immediately send out notifications. So if you set the total failures to 1, you may get a higher number of false alarms for a system. So we recommend setting that always to at least 2 if you're tuning, the actual counters. And there's a whole tutorial on the website about how to tune those counters and to calculate those values. The re-notification interval, like we talked about, this is how often to re-notify if this stays critical and no one acknowledges it. And then you can also, with a service check, you can specify an escalation. So you can basically say, how many times does it have to re-notify before notifying the escalation group? Every re-notification always re-notifies the contact group, so there's never a reason to pick the same group for a contact and for escalation, because they're always going to get re-notified at every interval. But once I define this, so for example, if I say, if this is down for 2 hours, I want to escalate it, I could set the re-notification interval to 60 minutes and escalate it 2, and then it's going to automatically escalate to the executives after that amount of time. So I'm going to notify the NOC. If it's down 2 hours and they don't take action, it's going to notify the executives. That's how escalation works. And in service checks, there's one level of escalation. When you go to host checks is when you get multiple levels of escalation. But service checks and thresholds only have a single level. Statistical group, again, when this goes critical, which column lights up. That's all that does. It also controls when you're running top talkers reports. If I'm sorting by statistical category, it'll actually say all the things under CPU will be shown together so that I can pick from those. So that's basically what that is. If this was a real specific check for a website, I might put it under a different category, but most of the service checks you'll leave under status. Any notes that I want to associate with the service check I can put in here, and you can set OmniCenter to forward these notes out with notifications. So the idea being that if you've got service checks that you need to embed some instructions into, what do I do when this goes critical? Who do I call? Who's responsible for it? This is one place you can put that data, and I'll show you there's a couple of others as well. Once I create that service check, it'll tell you that it may take up to 5 minutes to take effect. If you've got multiple administrators in the tool, it may take even a little bit longer because it has to get scheduled into the rotation of everything else that OmniCenter is doing, and that can take a few minutes. So when I go to the dashboard for this device, if I do it right after I create a service check like this, you may see that that system isn't even listed under the service checks. It's going to take it a few minutes to show up there, and then maybe a couple of minutes longer before it actually will get updated and show a status. So just keep that in mind. It is configured. It just has to get scheduled in before it starts showing up in different places. So that takes a few minutes. Okay, so if I go back in here, you can see all the settings are basically preserved from what I put in there. Now, the other places you can put in alerts or messages that go out with alerts if you want to. Under the main tab, there is a device note. This can be sent out with alerts if you want to. So anything that's specific to the whole device can be put in there as a note. There's also a tab here called documentation, and documentation lets you associate things with this particular site or device. So if I want to put in tech support number, contract numbers, all that kind of stuff, I can add those as device attributes, and those attributes will be sent out as part of the notification message if I want. You can also create reference contacts, and reference contacts are never used for notifications. What it basically is designed to do is to give you a place to put like responsible party. So this particular clinic goes down, you need to contact the site manager. I could put his information in as a reference contact, have that sent out with the alarm so that when I get that email message that tells me that this particular site is down or the device is having a problem, I've got his contact info there handy, and I can just use that to reach out to him. OmniCenter will not send messages directly to reference contacts, only to contacts set up in action groups. To incorporate those into your alerts, you can go into the alert section, and there's an alert formatting section here where I can edit all of the different types of alerts that OmniCenter sends out, or even create my own custom alert templates. And these templates basically are what format the message goes out in. There's a whole lot of different things that you can include in those messages, including device documentation, for example, service note, host note. If I want to include those with the particular message when notifications go out, I can modify this format here and it'll do exactly that. So it gives you some flexibility in terms of exactly how the alerts are sent out and what they look like when they get there. You can set up different templates for different notification methods. So text messages go out as smaller messages than full emails go out as or if you've got other templates or types of alerts that you want to include, like if you're integrating with a ticketing system via email, you can modify the format as necessary there.